This isn't just a pusher like a lot of vehicles that they unveil are just vehicles that don't actually function. It's a fully functioning vehicle, which is really incredible.
Today, we announced charges against Trevor Milton, former CEO and executive chair of Nikola Corporation.
It goes to show you that when you're changing the world and you're doing good things and you're an entrepreneur, these people love to try to take you down.
We charge that Milton engaged in a scheme to enrich himself by making false and misleading statements to retail investors.
On July 29th, 2021, Trevor Milton, the former CEO of Nikola Motors, was charged with 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of wire fraud. In the indictment, the U.S. Attorney's Office said that Milton made false claims about, and I quote, almost all aspects of the business. Big surprise, huh? Well, no. At this point, I think almost everybody who's been paying attention to this topic knows that Milton has lied to some degree about Nikola Motors. But I'm going to save the Nikola Motors talk for later on in this video, because Trevor Milton's history leading up to his last business is just as interesting as the charges laid out against him now. I think as you start to see the layers of shady business tactics and lies add up, you will begin to see that it was only a matter of time before this all caught up to him. But before I even begin, I don't want this to be aimed at calling out Trevor Milton. Things like this happen all the time, especially in the financial world, and no human is completely safe from the clutches of greed. I just think that this topic is interesting enough to share with all of you, so let's get into it. The first part of this story starts in 2003, when Trevor Milton drops out of his college after only 1 semester. According to Milton, he wanted to pursue his entrepreneurial dreams, and that's exactly what he did. He started St. George Security and Alarm Systems, an alarm sales company, immediately after quitting school. According to most sources, the company was sold to a man by the name of Glenn Pills in 2006. And thankfully in 2020, Mr. Pills spoke with CNN Business regarding this business sale. Here are some of the words that Glenn Pills used to describe the situation with Trevor Milton. Milton seemed like a good guy, but soon after purchase, the business became a disaster. The books were not what they said they were. And most notably, Glenn Pills lost the $300,000 down payment that he had invested into the company. The accounts receivables, essentially guaranteed future income, were actually just estimates provided to customers or sales that were already paid. A lot of the equipment, like ladders that Pills was promised with the deal, also didn't exist. If you read through the CNN article that I got this from, you can see that this first business venture for Milton just turned out to be a massive headache for the unlucky guy who bought it from him. As the contract allowed, Mr. Pills then gave the business back to Milton, where he then sold it again. According to Milton's business partner at the time, Trevor did not split the proceeds from this second sale 50-50 as it was meant to be. If the details of this story are true, Trevor Milton pocketed $1.9 million compared to his business partner's $100,000. And this is all laid out in the Hindenburg short report that I will link in the description. But if I had to wrap up the general idea of what happened to his initial company, it is that an investor and business partner were straight up lied to, or at the very least, not told the whole truth. Be sure to keep this part in mind because it will come up again later. In part 2 of the story, I'm going to be covering Trevor Milton's next 2 business ventures before Nikola. Now maybe you think that Milton would have learned from this first business, that lying and conniving his way through deals would get him success. But for the sake of time, we're going to be skipping over Trevor Milton's next company called upillar.com. This was a failed Craigslist eBay type company that Milton claimed had over 80 million active users and was beating Amazon. Yeah. But anyways, the next 2 businesses were much more closely related to Nikola than his previous companies. In 2009, he launched a company called D-Hybrid, and this would be Milton's first electric vehicle trucking attempt. This company's goal was to use compressed natural gas conversion technology to convert semi-trucks to use cleaner fuel. And during the early years, it seemed like it was off to a great start. D-Hybrid eventually entered into an agreement with the trucking company called Swift. This would be to convert 800 semis in a contract valued at $16 million. This was finally the breakthrough that Trevor had hoped for. And when it came time to deliver, D-Hybrid exceeded expectations. Just kidding. Rather than living up to the contract, D-Hybrid produced only 5 out of the 10 trucks that they had promised at the time. And the trucks themselves didn't even work as they were intended. Naturally, Swift filed a lawsuit in mid-2012. As D-Hybrid's capital was running out by this time, Milton had to reach out to new investors to keep the business afloat. One of these new investors was the CEO of another trucking company called Ryder Streams. Here are a couple of the claims that Trevor Milton expressed in an email to the CEO. So far, we are saving Swift 38% on their fuel bill. According to Hindenburg, that number was actually no higher than 24%. Another one was, we have a $250 million plus contract with Swift. But as I stated earlier, the contract was worth no more than $16 million. Milton was not just stretching the truth to these new investors, he was straight up lying. At this point, D-Hybrid figured it would be easier to seek a buyout, so they entered negotiation talks with a company called S-Power. Not long after, this company basically called D-Hybrid a farce, lying in almost all aspects. By the end of 2012, the company was in shambles, and absolutely torn apart by lawsuits and bad public image. So what Trevor Milton did next was genius. He started a new company called D-Hybrid Systems. But the best part about this is that the company was instead started with his father, conveniently leaving out his former business partners. Of course, this company's goal was not surprisingly exactly the same as D-Hybrid. Now look, I know this story can be really confusing, because it is. But what I'm showing you here is that Trevor Milton has been lying to investors and business partners for almost his entire career. So when I begin to break down Trevor Milton's eventual arrest, we understand the why and the how of the situation. But now let's get back to the story. The year's now 2014, and Milton is looking again to have his company bought out. He finds his buyer in a company called Worthington. The actual value of the deal ends up being around $15.9 million. Of course, this didn't stop Milton from lying about that number later. But this wasn't even the worst part. While this deal was still in the process of going through, the employees of D-Hybrid's main responsibility was to run all around the United States and make sure that all of the converted trucks were fixed. Why do they need fixed, you ask? Well, this is because some of the trucks in question were not even working safely. According to some former employees of D-Hybrid, many of the trucks were actually breaking in a way that could cause fatalities. Of course, these weren't fixed in a way that would guarantee nobody gets hurt. They were instead fixed in a way that the potential buyer wouldn't notice. About a year after this deal went through, Worthington identified problems with the acquisition and uncovered that the book value at the time of the deal was, of course, not correct. As I said at the beginning of this video, Trevor Milton was arrested on Thursday, July 29th, 2021. The prosecutors claimed that Milton made false and misleading claims about Nikola in order to pump the company's stock value. If you didn't know, Nikola Corporation stock jumped from $11 all the way to $65 in June of 2020. The short report that I have been referencing for much of this video came out in September of the same year. This of course did not help the stock at all, and today Nikola trades back at $11. This places the company at a market capitalization of around $4.45 billion. One thing to note is that the Securities Exchange Commission does not play around. It was one thing when Milton was fooling around with private companies and private investors, but once you take a company public and start fooling the guys on Wall Street bets, they will come down on you hard. So let's go through the indictment and see what Trevor Milton finally got pinned with. According to the documents, Trevor Milton was charged with 3 counts of securities and wire fraud, of which carry a maximum sentence of 20 to 25 years each. Securities fraud is the deceiving of investors by providing false information, and wire fraud is a federal crime that involves the mailing or electronic transmission of something associated with fraud. So what aspects of Trevor Milton's actions are associated with these crimes? Well, first of all, Milton repeatedly used social media to make false claims about Nikola's business. This includes, but is not limited to, the video of the Nikola One rolling down a hill, claiming a Nikola truck on stage was fully functional, but in reality was not, and claiming that all of their inverters were made in-house, but in reality they were bought from a third-party vendor. These are just some of the claims that were made by Trevor Milton on social media. Another area mentioned in the indictment documents was the partnership with General Motors. This deal was signed on September 8th, 2020. It was more of a strategic partnership for GM than anything else. GM received over $2 billion in stock, among other incentives for this deal. It is believed that GM did this to attach their name to the electric vehicle story. However, of course, this deal was made with the lies and shortcomings associated with Nikola and Trevor Milton. So what can we learn from this story? Well, first of all, we learned that Trevor Milton has a history of lying to investors and business partners. But I think this is something that we can certainly see coming up again. But it's important to note that Trevor Milton is not the only one to do this. We've seen it time and time again that something like this happens in the financial markets. And due to the nature of how Nikola went public through a special purpose acquisition company, this could bring further examination into some of the other EV startups that went public through the same route. I'm not claiming that these other companies are a fraud, or that they even need to be investigated, just that they will be under further scrutiny in the future. Companies might begin to think twice about wild claims regarding prototypes and technology capabilities when they simply don't have them yet. But I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. So what do you think about this situation? Let me know in the comments section down below. And if you made it this far in the video, consider leaving a like and subscribing if you want to see more content like this. If you want further readings and all the way Trevor Milton is a shady character, be sure to check out the links to the articles in the description.